Hi, Amanda. Hi, Kelly. I don't think you're, yeah. Um,
I'm here.
Hi.
oh, good.
I
Hi.
was gonna turn off the video till we started, unless you want me to. You tell me.
Oh, you mean the recording?
No, I just was gonna, when you start, I was gonna turn the video on. I was gonna wait the 2 minutes. Is that okay?
Oh, okay. Do you need, sure, whatever. I have 8 o'clock or 2 minutes, 1 minute now. Yeah. I think people are coming in. Hey, David.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
We'll wait. Well, it's exactly 8, so let's give ourselves a few minutes. Yeah.
Okay. People are coming in real fast.
People are
now.
coming in.
Yep.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Well, it's 8:02. Hey, everyone. I think a couple people are still dialing in, perhaps. Should we give it another minute or two? We've got a good group already.
Hi, Erica. Hey, Ed.
I see Erica.
Yeah,
Oh, the Schulmans.
That sounds. All right. We have a nice group. I think we should like jump into it. And my plan is did we set a time for how much time we want each Chevrutah to go on? What's like the common practice?
I had
at
that
the-
question myself.
I would say we cap out at an hour and we time limit ourselves.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, cool. So I think now it's already 8:03 and we've already got 12 people signed in, which is great. Well, why don't we, this is the first time we're all meeting in this capacity. Why don't we go and do a round of introductions? And say something a little bit about how you know, what your name is and perhaps where you are in life.
What?
And
And
and then yeah, let's do that. And then I'm also curious as to what are the questions that people want to grapple with. We've got this theme of diaspora. My mind immediately jumped to exile, which also begged the question about what is home. And I don't know how many of you had a chance to read this Edward Said essay. I think it's a great essay. And it's a good way to start to sink our teeth into this. But let me start. My name is David. Where am I? Where am I coming from? It's a hard question. I once upon a time, I did a PhD in political philosophy, so I've been steeped in some of these questions, though I never actually really wrestled with the question of what is home and what is exile. But I do think, among other things, those are deep political questions. I'm like a middle-aged white Jew, married with 2 kids. All these things seem like random identifiers that don't capture a whole lot. But I'm going to kick it back, and now I want to hand it all over to Natalie.
okay, Natalie Cohen, a member of the New Shul. I studied philosophy as an undergraduate. And so this is really strange to be cycling back to some of these thoughts and readings. Blessed with a little more time on my hands. I'm semi-retired. I'm still doing a couple of things. So this has been a really great pleasure to be able to read through some of these people's writings, and a lot that I did not know about before. I had not read Said or Amory, but I have read Hannah Arendt. And so I'm really looking forward to the discussions that we can all have about it. My parents were immigrants, but honestly, they were refugees, really. They never used that terminology. In one of Hannah Arendt's writings, she talks about that as well, but which I found kind of interesting. So I'll pass it on to whoever, let's see, Kelly, you were on a little early, so.
My name's Kelly Ty. I live in Providence, Rhode Island. I have my master's in gender and cultural studies. And I read Said in grad school. And I'm also adopted and multiracial, and adopted by a Jewish family. My biological mother was also adopted by a Jewish family. So I have definitely wrestled with these questions of exile and home and belonging. And I'm really excited to be here.
Let's hand it off to, pick someone to hand it off to. Who
Oh,
hasn't-
how about Amanda?
Hi, I'm Amanda Atlas. I'm a member of the New Shul, and I don't I don't think that much about feeling upset about being part of a diaspora, and I feel like we'd kind of discussed that at Yom Kippur that it's not a pressing question for me in terms of a trauma, but I do think that it is a very important part of the Jewish experience. And philosophically, I'm sort of like, we're here now. How do we move forward? And I think understanding the diaspora to continue being a strong peoples, I don't know really how to put it, but or feel safe is an important part. So I'm here in Brooklyn, and I will pass it on to Joni.
I knew you were gonna say that sometime.
Well, you're under me in the thing, you know.
Oh, I'm under you. Okay. See, you're beside me, actually. So my name is Joni Hegers Ozika, and I'm a member of the New Shul, a relatively new member. And I've been doing all I can to learn a lot about Judaism because I didn't have much of a Jewish education coming up. My father was an immigrant or also lived in the Pales of Settlement, and both he and my grandfather, so that was part of my personal experience of it. But mention the name Hannah Arendt to me, and I'm going to run in your direction. So I wanted to visit a lot of these things that were described, but also because the refugee situation, the situation of people who are displaced in this world right now is epidemic in proportion. And even, the Mexicans and the South Americans who are trying to reclaim the North America, which was originally theirs and which they are now barred out of. So that's an exile of another kind. All of these things are just a really critical part of our current political picture and rest very heavily upon my heart. So I wanted to see what answers could be here and the ethics behind it. And now I have to pick somebody, right?
Yes.
I'll pick the Schulmans.
Hi, everybody. You want to go first?
I'll go first. Hi, Joni. Thanks,
Sure.
everyone. Hi, everyone. So interesting with the Schulmans, because my last name is Sasson, and I'm like very much did not take my dear husband's last name, and partially because just like a long history of the name that came from lands far away. And so for me, the exile discussion already evoked a lot. I grew up in Canada, but I'm very accidentally Canadian. My family is from, I'm first generation Canadian, and now I live here. So I'm very kind of already a little fractured. And my grandparents were born in Syria and Lebanon and Egypt. And my father was born in Egypt, and my sister and my aunts were born in Egypt, and my mom was born during the period of exile, like in the New World. So I have a very fractured understanding of what it means to be from somewhere. And I'm sure we'll talk about like that Said piece brought up a lot for me. My like commitment to Brooklyn is very new. And I'm like trying it on like an old suit or something like that. And it's like, it's awkward. I wanted to study with you all. I'm so thankful for this Chevrutah because I have felt in these, this time of like war and horror that I thought Hannah Arendt has like some answers for us. So, I'm looking for something from her, and I'm really grateful to do that in this community. Shulman.
Hey everybody, nice to see you all. And thanks, David and Natalie, for bringing us all together. I grew up in Israel, like a large segment of my brain goes to the question of what am I doing here? How did I end up here? Why am I not living there? These are like ongoing pieces of my brain, my heart, my soul. So the question of exile, and then I read this Said piece, and it's like it was what was cool about the Said piece is that I came to this Chevrutah thinking, yes, the war has brought to light how messed up diaspora communities' relationship to their homeland is and what that does politically. And so let's explore that. But then I keep hearing David saying like, yeah, that's not as interesting to me. And so I read the Said piece, and it just, he just made your point so well that this is a much larger issue it's got its political implications, but it's really a question of the soul and of this time period in which, like Joni said, there's like, a huge percentage of the human population that are in exile. Um, and Yeah, so I'm excited to dive into that. And I read a little bit of the Jean Améry stuff that David sent my way earlier this fall. So I'm excited. Thank you. And how about Linda?
Hi, everyone. I'm Linda. I'm a member of the New Shul. And I really never thought of myself as part of a diaspora. I come from a super assimilated background. Both my parents' families have been here since the middle of the 19th century, came here voluntarily, not forced out by any particulars. I mean, well, yes, things were not great economically in Lithuania, but they and as Michelle knows, I was brought up, not really educated in Judaism. I was fully aware that I was Jewish, but I wasn't educated in any way about it. And it was not emphasized to me by my parents that should be my primary identity. And I think that was probably because of their delight at being assimilated. and living the American dream. And I never really wrestled with what it meant to be a Jew until well into my adulthood. And then I started to get curious, and that led me to start, join a synagogue, to become an adult bat mitzvah. But then this question of diaspora is, I think, very different actually from even the fundamental identity of being a Jew, and that's like being a displaced Jew. And displaced from where? Well, there's this whole question of Israel, and Israel has meant, I've had zero attachment to Israel my entire life. My parents have never been, we've never been, never talked about it in home as anything special, other than it was just another country like any other country. And then our daughter, our middle one, graduates college and decides to pick up and move to Israel 6 weeks before October 7th. And so we are now dealing with having a relationship with this country. And it's kind of been a fast forward for me in terms of figuring out, you know, what should my relationship be to this country? What should my feelings be to this country? And should I have some kind of connection to these people? And then I think it's also been, I feel also that this identity as a member of a diaspora is in some way being forced upon me in the way that I feel I am now being looked at as and identified as a Jew in America. Growing up, I don't feel like people, that was not the primary association people had with me when they met me or whatever, but now I feel like I'm wearing this huge sign every time I walk down the street or into a room in my workplace or whatever. So I feel like I have to deal with this, and I have a lot of questions. So I can't wait to talk about them with all of you. And I'm going to pass this on to Gabe.
Thanks, Linda. And sorry, my name is Gabe Tobias. I live in Brooklyn. I'm new to all of this, so thank you, David and Natalie and everyone else, for inviting me into this space. I'm very much looking forward to this. I think I digitally stumbled across the Chevrutah in a sort of few months of soul searching and thinking about both the personal and political moment, and how I relate to that, and how I relate to Judaism, Jewish tradition, Jewish people, and of course as well to Israel, as Linda was talking about. And so have gone on a bit of a tear, I would say, reading a lot and talking to a lot of people that I know, and then looking for spaces like this where I could learn more. So mostly trying to come with as open a mind as we can these days, and looking forward to talking with you all and over these coming weeks. And I will pass it to Ed.
Hey, thank you. My name's Ed Hernsett. I'm a member of the New Shul. Like several others who have spoken, Linda, Johnny, I grew up with almost no Judaism. I always knew I was a Jew. I grew up in a Jewish town, but nobody went to services, and it really, the religious part of it was not it's just not part of my life. And I didn't really think otherwise about being a Jew. It's just so many people around me were equally non-religious Jews until I was in my teens and early 20s. I was in a situation for a few years where I was like the only Jew around. And that was really weird. And I learned that regardless of how you think of yourself, other people are always going to see you as a Jew and not going to let you forget it and share with you their ideas of what a Jew is, which, some of them are totally nuts. And that changed my thinking. I wanted to do this Chevrutah because diaspora is a fascinating subject. I love how David and Natalie turned it into something a little more specific, but also a little bit, to the side with focusing on exile and home. I thought the Said essay was fabulous and actually tied a lot of that together, including some of the themes that like Joni talked about, refugees everywhere. And I loved what Said said about, the difference between exiles and refugees being a sort of 20th, 21st century change in scope. But I thought the readings looked really interesting, and I love talking about ideas with people. So I'm very excited about this Chevrutah.
Pass it along to
So
someone.
Marvin.
In a Detroit suburb, I'm a new member of the New Shul through my daughter. Misha married Amy and Jonathan a couple of years ago, and I thought it would be a good idea if we signed up as out-of-town members. We did attend the Rosh Hashanah services. I'm a retired professor, and I have to admit I haven't done the reading yet. I was asked to give a lecture tomorrow, so I've been working on that. I'll try to catch up for the second reading. If I ever come down on students for not doing the reading. So one thought. I'm pretty old, and my parents came to the U.S. in 1940. I have relatives in Israel, Italy, South Africa, and probably other places that I don't know of. My sister-in-law, who's a distant cousin, and her family managed to get out of Bulgaria to Spain, where she was studying French during World War II, and then Israel, and I think Canada, then Boston, and finally the US, would say that having a nice home in Brooklyn Heights has been her home. You know, that's the first place she felt that she really had a home, and I thought that resonates to the theme. I just think this is intellectually very interesting, so I'm looking forward to it. I am originally a New Yorker, but we've been here in the Midwest since 1971, so it's been a while. Let's see who hasn't. I have to see who hasn't.
Susan.
Susan is,
Susan.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And Margaret, what's the lecture on tomorrow?
victims' rights.
So yeah, I think Tina and I both are the ones who haven't yet spoken. So I think the way to describe my relationship, I'm also a member of the New Shul, and I realize that I feel like my relationship to 20th century Judaism is a little Forrest Gumpish, in that my mother was born in Berlin in 1929 and was the only Jewish child. And although that's what I'm told, I'm wondering if it's true, but that's her experience as the only Jewish child in a public school until Kristallnacht, when during that time, her father was desperately for many years trying to get out of Berlin, of Germany. And the teachers were very protective of her. And actually, I don't know what was going through my grandmother's mind when she sent her after Kristallnacht, but in any case, the teacher sent her home, and that was the end of her. But she was 9 years old, so that's the end of her, education, actually, public school education, formal education. My father was born in Lodz, Poland, and was 12 when the war began, and was bar mitzvahed in the Lodz ghetto. And his whole family was murdered in the Holocaust. He was liberated just after he turned 18. And then met my mother. My mother's family actually survived via Siberia. And I used to say in my youth, as what I thought was a political radical, that my mother lived through Hitler, Stalin, and Nixon. In any case, they wound up meeting in southern Germany after the war, and my father then volunteered in 1948 when the war started in Israel for independence, or whatever we're going to call it now. He volunteered and was in the Israeli army as an airplane mechanic, he and my uncle. And when it was legal, my mother came with her mother, and they got married in 1949, had no place to live. So they squatted. My father heard about an empty Arab house, which is now in the area of the University of Tel Aviv. And that was my first home. So it had a very nice garden and chickens and a goat. And my mother, I was very proud that I thought in my hippie days, I had that background already, and had chickens for a while, and a garden like I did in my early childhood, and they decided to come to the United States. I have a lot of memories of Israel embedded in my psyche, and the trip over and the arrival in United States, and my blocking out whatever Hebrew I knew until I was in my late 20s and at Ulpan in Israel. And all of a sudden, my language disorder disappeared. So I don't know, other than the fact that it's no accident, I think, that I kind of studied early childhood development, that I'm a psychoanalyst, and still working, and thankfully, and you know, the diaspora is a part of my, and I live next door to the new school. So where Anna Arendt was, you know, I mean, so it's just a part of who I am. And I remember when I did finally able to reconnect with the Hebrew that was inside of me, that that I remember learning at that time that there are three ways of making a person a slave. And one is to take, you know, when they leave their homeland, one is to change their name, which happened to me, change their clothing and their language. And those things happened to me. And I really could identify, a lot of things started making sense when I learned about that. So, and then there's the whole issue of leaving Israel, and I was 4.5 at the time, meaning you go down, you don't rise up. So what that means in terms of identity today as a Jew, you know, I think it's something. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity, and I have not yet read the Edward Said article, but I look forward to it. So I hand it over to Tina.
Tina, you're muted.
Hi, my name is Tina. I'm a neutral member. I didn't have a chance to look at the material or actually read the blurb carefully just because of circumstances in my life. But the theme of home resonated with me, and I'm here to hear more.
All right, great. I think we heard from everyone. And I guess to situate myself in a way similar to how others situated themselves, I also live in Brooklyn like some of them. I was born in Israel, lived there till I was close to 7 years old, and I've lived in the US since. And I think of myself as living at home in multiple places and also without a home often. So I vacillate. And yeah, I am influenced by some traditions of asking whether or not it's possible to be at home in the world. So, you know, we talked a little bit about this on Yom Kippur. In a world where there's the 1755 Lisbon earthquake that killed 60,000 people, in a world where there's Darfur, there's Sudan today, there's Gaza, there's Auschwitz, there's millions and millions of dislocated, displaced, exiled, refugeed, whatever the term we use, people. How can any of us claim, if we're humanists, to be at home in the world? What does that mean? And so to me, it's hard to separate the question of what do we mean by diaspora from what is it to be at home. What is diaspora implies, as we were talking about, some kind of referent. So you've dispersed from something. And what is that something? I'm also reminded, I don't know how many are familiar with Plato's Symposium, but in the Symposium, he has the figure of Aristophanes talks about the myth of the circle man, the circle men. And it's this idea that we are originally circles. We are like walking circles, and then we are broken in half. And so we are half circles traversing the earth in search of our other half to complete, to make whole that which is originally broken. It's so, which is an interesting idea about what it means to be in the world, as if we're broken halves, always searching to complete. I'm not saying that that's the condition, but it's interesting to reflect on that understanding of what it means to be a person in the world. So I think the Said piece, some of us have read it and some of us have not read it. So I think the way to structure this is to try to grab some excerpts and maybe focus. This is our first meeting to try to unpack a little bit and use Said as the text and to get into what it is we mean by exile or diaspora, if we want to jump into that term. And then to start thinking about, I think what's interesting about Said is you can't really talk about exile without talking about nationalism, some concept of belonging to something. So it's interesting how these terms or these feelings also have reference points. So again, I'm dispersed from something, I'm exiled from something, or I long for something. There's also a tradition that's what made me think of Aristophanes as circle man. I long for some completion, some completeness. We sing next year in Jerusalem at the Seder, which I don't know if it's a literal aspiration, but it's capturing something. So maybe the challenge with is that that I don't think we have page numbers. So what version of
There's page. There's totally the page number bottom of it's like 77 to 8, right? Everybody have that?
Oh, because you're looking at the yeah, here's the issue. Okay. So you'll have to help me because I don't have a page number. I took the essay out of his book, but I know that what I sent around was the Grant issue from whatever 1984 or something. So I don't have page numbers.
I think for most it's 77
Yeah.
to 89.
Okay, let me see if I can figure it out. Okay, let's. So why don't we? I'm gonna read a few passages. I want to just get us to. Let me just start here. He says in the early part of the essay, is it not true that the views of exile in literature and moreover in religion obscure what is truly horrendous? That exile is irremediably secular and unbearably historical, that it is produced by human beings for other human beings, and that like death, but without death's ultimate mercy, it has torn millions of people from the nourishment of tradition, family, and geography? This is a question he's asking. Okay, and then do you see the paragraph that starts with "we come to nationalism and its essential association with exile"?
Hold on, that one was the bottom of 78.
Yeah, bottom 78.
Bottom of 78, the top of 79.
Can someone read "we come to nationalism," that whole paragraph?
Oh, there. That's page 80.
Page 80.
All right, Rabbi, go ahead.
You do it. You found it. You do it.
All right. You want the whole paragraph, David?
Yeah, the whole paragraph.
Okay, we come to nationalism and its essential association with exile. Nationalism is an assertion of belonging in and to a place, a people, a heritage. It affirms the home created by a community of language, culture, and customs, and by so doing, it fends off exile, fights to prevent its ravages. Indeed, the interplay between nationalism and exile is like Hegel's dialectic of servant and master, opposites informing and constituting each other. All nationalisms in their early stages develop from a condition of estrangement. The struggles to win American independence, to unify Germany or Italy, to liberate Algeria, were those of national groups separated, exiled from what was construed to be their rightful way of life. Triumphant achieved nationalism then justifies retrospectively as well as prospectively a history selectively strung together in a narrative form. Thus, all nationalisms have their founding fathers, their basic quasi-religious texts, their rhetoric of belonging, their historical and geographical landmarks, their official enemies and heroes. This collective ethos forms what Pierre Bourdieu, the French sociologist, calls the habitus, the coherent amalgam of practices linking habit with inhabitants. Pausa. See?
And then in time, oh, well, yeah, another sentence.
Keep going.
Keep going. It's so good.
In time, this really does get really good here. In time, nationalisms consign truth exclusively to themselves and relegate falsehood and inferiority to outsiders. As in the rhetoric of capitalist versus communist or the European versus the Asiatic. And just beyond the frontier between us and the outsiders is the perilous territory of not belonging. This is to where in a primitive time peoples were banished, and where in the modern era immense aggregates of humanity loiter as refugees and displaced persons. Nationalisms are about groups, but in a very acute sense, exile is a solitude experienced outside the group. The deprivations felt at not being with others in the communal habitation. How, then, does one surmount the loneliness of exile without falling into the encompassing and thumping language of national pride, collective sentiments, group passions? What is there worth saving and holding on to between the extremes of exile on the one hand and the often bloody-minded affirmations of nationalism on the other? Do nationalism and exile have any intrinsic attributes? Are they simply two conflicting varieties of paranoia? Sorry for the editorial.
Wow. No, it's just like, yeah, it's so powerful. It's also to think about how they constitute each other. So it's almost what comes, that one doesn't come before the other. Well, you would think logically that exile, that home comes first, and only then can you have exile. But what he's actually saying is that there's this weird interplay, and that it's the exile, it's the condition of exile that also creates, in a sense, the myth of home. I don't know, but I'm curious what other people are hearing here.
If I may, I love this part too. Although I have to say, I think that Said is throwing a lot of stuff out there, much of, and some of which just doesn't fit. Like, I'm not sure how the American independence fits into this theme of exile and then, nationalism. Definitely the nationalism part. But I'm not sure I see. I guess they exiled themselves from one of their homelands, but what I found fascinating was that how nationalism inevitably leads to exclusion of the other. And we see that in, what Joni brought up about refugees. These are people who are voluntary exiles for political reasons, for economic reasons, from Venezuela, from Central America, from, countries, actually from other parts of the world coming into Central America and then moving up into the States, looking for a new home. So they're, this is a diaspora that is maybe a welcomed fleeing from their prior condition. And because of American nationalism, they're not, notwithstanding what it says on the Statue of Liberty, they're not welcome. They are othered and they are excluded. And I find that, a horrifying aspect of nationalism. But I'm not sure how that works with exile. So I loved a lot of the points that Said made here and the tension between exile and nationalism. But it has, I think there's a lot of other forces at work that kind of minimize the exile part of what's going on and put more weight on nationalism and othering people.
The colonization of this country was because of people who emigrated here. They didn't, many of them were exiled. They were criminals and they were undesirables that were sent here, and also religious people who felt they couldn't have their own, they couldn't worship in the way that they wanted to. So that was part of it, but also there's the exile of Native Americans, you know, the exile of the Aboriginal peoples, which in a way I see as a parallel to, you know, and pardon me if I sound ignorant, but I see it as kind of a parallel to the Palestinian, you know, the fatwa, you know, when people settled in large scale in Israel and displaced the Palestinians. But also, I mean, were they exiles, the people that were brought here as slaves? Were they certainly exiles in their own country, or they were exiled from their own country? They were sold by their country people. And, you know, so I mean, like, it's like a whole thing. This country is like rife with displacement and exile in a way. And then also the whole South American thing, you know, this was Mexico. We were Mexico. California was Mexico. You know, all of the northern territories were South America. I mean, and it was all, you know, because of the European invasion of South America, everything changed up. But they can't move freely. They are not allowed to enter this country. It's as if they were never here, but they were.
I wanted to just pop in. I really related to this conflict, or not this conflict, but this dialectic of exile and nationalism as coming from the parallel of an adoptee, and this idea that I am very much an exile. I can't go back to the place that I came from, right? In some ways, the place that I came from doesn't really exist. And the parallel to nationalism being that there is a narrative, there is a sort of origin story that I could choose to believe to give me meaning and hope and place, but that ultimately it never answers for what was lost. What was lost can't be recreated sort of synthetically. It's a very Jewish idea, right? It's this endless yearning, right? Yearning for the Messiah, yearning for Zion, whatever it is. It's this yearning for something that can't really be what it once was. I just thought that was really interesting.
A quick point to add to that. I agree with David that there's a lot in this this paragraph, a ton of concepts that need to be unpacked. And I had written a note about it. Estrangement is perhaps estrangement from what was, as opposed to a place, or, I mean, it could be a place, certainly, but some historical nostalgia for what might have been or what was. And then I also wrote another note to myself on that paragraph, was that there, as Joni pointed out, there were already people here. This is an issue that came up in the wonderful talk from the Yom Kippur folks from Salt of the Earth, where, you know, two peoples are fighting over the same piece of land, but he, in himself, Said says, he talks about American independence. Well, okay, but there were already people here and they were treated terribly, and there was a lot of bloodshed, and for years pushing the Native Americans onto very poor reservations. So it's very complex, the concept of estrangement and exile. And the only other thing I would add on this is that Said, I was reading some secondary sources to try to understand where people were coming from, but also Said wrote a memoir about himself. I think he had a terrible health diagnosis when I think he died of cancer, but he wrote a memoir called Out of Place. And the whole beginning of this discussion was he didn't really have a feeling of ever belonging somewhere. And so it kind of explains where he's driven from. in his writings and his philosophy, including his name. Why was he Edward, which was a weird name? None of his grandparents were named Said. He didn't know where that came from. It goes on and on. So he's very keen on this whole concept, and I thought it was a great piece as well. Anyhow, a little scrambled up, but
I just wanted to add to what Kelly was saying also about this idea of this I forget the word that you used, I'm sorry, but it was like this idea that you can never get that piece back because it's unfindable. And wanted to pull that back to sort of a more, what feels like a typical Jewish diaspora to me, which was really interesting because in this whole group, I feel like I'm the only one with this background. But my family came from the Pale of Settlement, and honestly, like, we have no idea where anybody's from. And we sort of tried over the years to figure it out. But I mean, I joke, like my grandfather said, yeah, somebody came through Munich, like we were some fancy German Jews. We are not fancy German Jews. We are like shtetl stock, And so this idea of, if you tie in this idea of nationalism to like, what is the right kind of Jew to be? Like, where should your diaspora be from? And there's no way of just finding it out at all. And, interestingly, to hear all of you talk, for me, part of this is that I don't need to know, right? Like most of you know, my dad just died, and I kind of was just saying, like, should we be writing all this stuff down? And I keep thinking, I don't know, for what? So it's just this idea of how I don't want to pull it to me specifically, but to this idea that Kelly, I thought, really hit home with that. Will we ever know? And then I wanted to add to that, do we need to? So I just.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. And maybe for some folks are comfortable as guests in the world. And for others, there's some need to know, or there's this yearning. I think, Erica, you were about to jump in.
It's kind of pulling on what Kelly and Amanda just said. I think one of the things in this that I found kind of lacking in a way, well, actually, he gets that part, David, that part about like being a guest or not needing to know or not needing to be attached. There's that part at the end about like, do you even need to be from anywhere? Which is something that really resonates for me because I'm like always like, I'm from everywhere and I'm from nowhere, and it's perfectly fine for me on the one hand. On the other hand, what was I going to say about that? I think what struck me when Kelly was speaking was what struck me here is like this idea of a static past place that still exists because it exists in your memory and it exists and it doesn't, just not true. And when there's this part later on where he starts talking about the resentment one feels towards people who like know where they're from, right? And they're just like, I live in this place and I'm from here. And I feel that way towards those people. I'm like, who are you? And how do you live like this? Like, what does it mean to be like from a place and you're just going to live here your whole life? And it's like so hard for us to like settle here. I was like, well, what if we have to go? Don't we want to like be able to go if we want to go? Like, it's really hard for me to be of a place. So I really resonated with his resentment. I thought that was an amazing word. But I think the most lacking thing is a discuss here so far in this article is just this discussion of the myth of the static kind of homeland and the fact that it's like it's a dynamic, it has changed just like we have changed, and the being displaced is a changing experience, and we are not of a place only I'm over here. I am now a changed person, and the place has changed because I'm no longer there, and it has changed for lack of me. And so like, what is that relationship, and how do we grapple a little bit more with the dynamism of all of that?
I was hearing, I was listening to the Ta-Nehisi Coates Ezra Klein podcast. Did you guys hear that? It's kind of,
I hear I'm supposed to hear it, but I haven't heard it yet.
yeah, it's interesting. And there's a moment in which they're kind of arguing the whole time, but then there's this one moment in which Ezra says to Ta-Nehisi, he talks about how Biden and people of that generation in America are still treating Israel as if it were Israel 20 years ago. And he's talking about the protesters on college campuses as, you know, they don't know that Israel, they only know this Israel, which is really horrible. And so uh, uh, and so there's like this there was a change, there was like a shift, and I see it a lot in like when we go to Montreal, the Montreal Jewish community is like they're very conservative, and I always feel like I'm back in the 1980s when I'm over there. There's just talking about Israel and peace and all these things that I grew up with in Israel in the 80s and 90s that are just nobody's there in Israel, you know, or Palestine. And that's what I'm seeing in the Said thing is like there's a gap between the experience of exile that is made up and the national experience over there. And I see that all the time with like these super extreme exile communities, like the Palestinian, a lot of the Palestinian diaspora. They're like very extreme, not interested in improving anything, only in dismantling. And the Israeli, you know, and the Jewish diaspora, a lot of it is very right wing, and they're not interested really in change, in improvement. Whereas, you know, anybody who lives there knows that something's got to give. So it's like the story created over here doesn't match what's actually going on. And that's what I'm hearing him say is like, we're making up a story that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the reality of the nation over there, the homeland.
What was this podcast?
May I, oh, I'm sorry, let Misha answer you and then I'll
put the link in the chat.
Thank you.
may I just, Misha, if you don't mind, pull it to the personal in a second, for a second, and you and I've discussed this, but I think it's relevant, like the population of Israel from when I was growing up and many of us was growing up, it's very different today. I mean, who had all the kids? And it's much more conservative. The Russian population came and changed the makeup from like a kind of Ashkenazi Jewish and maybe some Sephardic, right, European Jewish to a much broader perspective. And as you were talking, I was wondering, do you feel like you're in exile from what had been the Israel you grew up with?
Yeah, of course. It doesn't really, you know, it's there in romantic form, but it's not really,
No,
you know.
yeah, I think he's saying that a bit, right? We create narratives. Narratives mythologize. And Palestine is not what it was 20 years ago or 50 years ago. So there's no question that both shift or have shifted, and this isn't unique to those two peoples. I like that resentment passage a lot. It actually, I don't know that we were going to get to it, but there's an essay by Jean Amour, Resentment. Basically, you know, he was an Auschwitz survivor, and he says everybody assumes and wants things to heal with time, but it doesn't go away. I was in the dungeons. I saw horrible things. I'm haunted by it. I resent you for saying that I should just be cheery and move on. I want to, there's so many themes here, and we only have a few minutes left. And I did want to read a couple more passages in the essay. But I also think this question of belonging and not belonging, estrangement and nationalism, it seems to me it drives to the core. We do it within families too. You're in my family, you're not in my family. Who's in the tribe, who's outside the tribe. I used to work a lot on democracy. There's always a question of the boundary problem. When we talk about we the people, who's included and who's not included? And you have an original democratic moment where some we organically emerges and determines where the boundary line is. It determines who's part of the we and who's not part of the demos, the we. You can't really something else happens. But and then there's this whole tradition of cosmopolitanism and universalism, which says no, this boundary problem is actually unjust and inhuman, and the true conception of justice is universal and cosmopolitan. No tribes and families and blood ties. It's human, which was what in some ways the Enlightenment sought to achieve, and I guess never successfully. So, but I want to, on that note, here I want to do two things: one or two more passages from Said, of the direction we want to take this. I guess in the next session is 2 weeks, because I thought we would already jump into Arendt, but I actually think maybe not yet. And then there's also the question of which Arendt, and how do we do any kind of justice to Arendt, which I don't know how we do. But do you know if there's a passage here? I don't know the page number, but Said quotes Monk. Do you guys know what page that is?
88.
All right, who can read that? Actually, the paragraph before, if someone can read that for us. So it starts with the exile knows.
On the bottom of 87?
No, here, this one.
Yeah,
Oh,
the
yeah.
exile knows that in a secular contingent world,
88.
homes are always provisional. So, because I want to yeah, that's the exile knows that in a secular contingent world, homes are always provisional. That paragraph, if someone can read it.
I'll read it. The
Super.
exile knows that in a secular and contingent world, homes are always provisional. Borders and barriers which enclose us within the safety of familiar territory can also become prisons and are often defended beyond reason or necessity. Exiles cross borders, break barriers of thoughts and experience. Hugo of St. Victor, a 12th century monk from Saxony, wrote these hauntingly beautiful lines. It is therefore a source of great virtue for the practiced mind to learn, bit by bit, first to change about invisible and transitory things, so that afterwards it may be able to leave them behind altogether. The man who finds his homeland sweet is still a tender beginner. He to whom every soil is as his native one is already strong, but he is perfect to whom the entire world is as a foreign land. The tender soul has fixed his love on one spot in the world. The strong man has extended his love to all places. The perfect man has extinguished his. Go on.
Oh, no, I think that's enough.
I think
mean, that's
that's
beautiful.
so meaty right there.
That's pretty.
Woo.
Yeah. How do you interpret that?
Well, he's a monk. And one of the thoughts that was, crossing my mind is that in 2,000 years of diaspora Judaism, Jews can be home anywhere if they're, if they're living in a religious community. Who knows, an individual Jew living in the same town as Rashi may not have been, terribly intellectual or spiritual, but that's their connection. And this is before the modern state. So he's writing in the 12th century. So people grow accustomed to their place and they come to like the place. When Tevye and the company leaves Anatekfa at the end of Fiddler on the Roof, there's kind of a longing for it, but do they really belong there? The other thought I had was there's a lot of generality here, and intellectuals like to generalize, but are, you know, each individual, and each of us have spoken about our own place in the world, has our own story. And then there's our parents' stories and our siblings' stories, and how much commonality is between them.
You know,
Excuse
when
me, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Ed.
No, go ahead.
No, I just want to introduce this idea about mourning, and that that we all need attachments, and we attach ourselves to places. And the course of human experience, there's always been constant change of place, for all kinds of reasons. And those aspects of our identity are attached to those places. And the idea of what struck me when he said about paranoia, and how I understand that tendency in people is the lack of the capacity to mourn, almost. And I think one of the reasons Judaism may have, you know, withstood all of that is that it does offer a way to mourn. And the idea of, you know, next year in Jerusalem, it's a way of keeping the attachment and moving on. So I just want to.
Well, you know, that's great. You make me think of something, Susan, because I mean, I love this quote by the priest or the monk or whatever, because this idea of living in the earth or living on the earth and being of the earth has always had great personal appeal to me within my own, you know, cosmological universe. Okay, but I think that maybe, you know, ultimately because of the diaspora and because of repeated expulsions from Israel historically or biblically, or, you know, it seems to me as if the concept of, you know, Eretz Israel and next year in Jerusalem and all of that stuff is more a concept of coming back to a kind of a spiritual homeland that is not necessarily rooted in the ground, but in the culture and the ethos of the people. It's very, you know.
Yeah.
Something later about that, like, what are the characteristics of a place that makes us feel like home, right? And so it's about sort of abstracting it and saying, why do I feel home where I do? And is it about a specific place, or is it about shared values or traditions, or, you know, that it's not necessarily blood and soil, but that it's something more ephemeral.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's one of the points that Said was making. This essay was written, he died over 20 years ago. So this essay must be 25, 30 years old. And I think he was writing to, like, Misha, you're growing up in the 80s and 90s. He's an English professor. And, you know, one of the things I think he's trying to do is say, this is not James Joyce's Silence, Exile, and Cunning. Exile isn't romantic the way it's been portrayed in so much of the literature that he taught. And he's taking it out of a tradition of, you know, sort of, you know, the exiles in Paris and the exiles, you know, living around the world in this nostalgic and romantic place, and making it something much more brutal and much more modern and part of our time. But one little point on Hugo, I gotta wonder the context of this quote, because he says in the first paragraph that, you know, to afterwards it may be able to leave them behind altogether, the things of this world. So he may just be talking about, you know, giving up things to just worship God, and you know, not what we're seeing it and what clearly Said saw in it. I mean, it's a beautiful quote, but I just, you know, wonder what Hugo is really getting at.
What Joni's getting at, right? Like, it's home is not a material phenomenon, it's actually immaterial, it's spiritual. And
Sounds very Buddhist.
It does sound very Buddhist. And to be like the greatest height is to actually be, what was it, to be basically, I don't remember the exact language, but to be comfortable in the foreignness of all lands. So in a sense, it's to relinquish all attachment insofar as being at home implies attachment to place. And maybe there's actually something problematic about that. I want to be sensitive to our time. Yeah?
Yeah.
You were going to come in, Natalie?
Well, just
Yeah, I was going to just say, I know, Joni, I know you run for rent, but she comes down on this question as the home is her language, the German language, because that's where when she was growing up, she learned poetry. She references poetry and the arts and culture and all of that. And so there is a section in Google Docs that was sent around, I hope, that has a link to the interview with her with English subtitles. And the question was, what remains, when you've left your homeland, your country? She talks about the mother tongue and the fatherland, and says what's left is the language and her language. And I think that comes up in these other writers. In fact, even in the Said piece, there's a discussion about language and culture and, the people that you feel aligned with.
I recently found this poster from Kiev in 1917 for the Jewish Bund. That was essentially a response to like growing nationalisms and Zionism that was calling Jews to vote, is in Yiddish, and it was calling Jews to vote in national elections and to have a voice in the National Assembly as laborers. And the title of the poster says, there where you live, there is your home. This idea that like where you are, where you live, that's your home. It's not this other place, right? It's where you are right now. It's who you are right now. And I think that's really interesting against this idea of like yearning for Zion and to reestablish the temple and to rebuild sort of what we lost. I think those are interesting.
Or maybe for others, it's not a yearning, nor is it a being at home. It's just the enduring sense of strangeness. But that doesn't have to be a negative thing. It is at times, but it's not necessarily always. I want to leave us just with a couple sentences from the critic George Steiner, and then there's this essay that I started reading, but I haven't gotten very far on Steiner and the Jew and his Jewish problem. But there's this tension between the particular and the universal, and in some sense, the Jews have always played that drama out in the history of civilization, and some folks, at the start of this call, were saying how you feel Jewish identity to a certain extent is constituted by the gaze of other non-Jews who are othering Jews, calling out Jews, which way is what happened to Jean-Marie, the Auschwitz survivor, who we'll take a look at. But I wanted to maybe explore this question a little bit more about what it means to be Jewish and what is diaspora and assimilation. Perhaps before we get into Amari, I'm not sure, but Arendt has also come up a lot. I think Arendt, we could look at, there's an essay called What is Freedom? Because I think Arendt's conception of freedom is really essential to understanding what it might mean to inhabit the world in Arendtian terms. And by the way, the concept of home in Arendt is not a particularly elevated idea. She thinks you got to take care of like the domestic stuff so that you can do the important stuff, which is to act politically free. And what she laments is the domesticification, as it were, of politics. So everything is just about the material. We don't go beyond, right? Think about every election cycle. It's like, how do we feed ourselves? How do we house ourselves? How do we educate ourselves? It's the same issues. It's all it's all about attending to material needs. That to her is the domestic, the private sphere. We have to satisfy those so that we can do the more elevated stuff, which is in a sense to build, to create homes, to create worlds. But there's there are multiple senses, I think, of home and Arendtian thinking. But I'll just read the Steiner, and then let's think about a couple, where we want to turn Arendt. So there's the concept of freedom and political action, and the principle of natality beginning, which I think is incredibly important to Arendtian thought. But I think Eichmann in Jerusalem has also come up, which is a very different work. But in my own thinking, I think of Eichmann in Jerusalem as Arendt's attempt to resolve this question of how can you be at home in a world where there's Sudan, Gaza, Auschwitz, Lisbon earthquake, etc. So so it could also go in that direction, but I don't think we can go in both, because then I think we'll get muddled. So as people have a chance to mull that over, yeah, Natalie.
I was just going to say, I don't want to give Amory short shrift. I'm new to Amory. I hadn't known about his writings. And I think the original, when people were going around talking about how they think about this and how their personal histories, many were not introduced to Judaism. Many were not raised with Judaism. He was raised Catholic. It just was happenstance that his father was Jewish and was killed in World War I. And just when he was an activist, and when the Nazis found that out, they said, well, you're a Jew. And he quotes Sartre a lot, saying that you're only a Jew to the extent that other people think you are. And I think that came up in the opening discussion, that he had no concept of what the observation, the observance is, and all of that. And I think that's very interesting and important, because it's an identity that other people were ascribing to him. He never thought of himself that way, and yet he had to be a Jew. He had an obligation to be a Jew, because he was obviously reminded every day with the number on his arm. So yeah, I don't want to give him short shrift.
Yeah.
It's like a lifetime of, reading that. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we'll definitely, we'll devote some time to Amory. Actually, what I was thinking was, here's a potential trajectory, a little bit of like Steiner inspired stuff next week, then Amory, and then we end with Arendt.
Sounds good.
But if Amory is so engrossing, and we don't want to leave him, we can then just figure out a way to tie some Arendt into the Amory discussion as well, and do that for a couple of weeks. And we'll figure it out. But
I mean, you can do it through Itamar, but just specifically tell us what you're thinking about, like which article you want us to read, because
for sure. Yeah. The Arendt, I feel like I have to pull out some pages, because there's not endless time.
PDF is nice rather than these links that don't go million. That'll be great.
Yeah, totally.
You should let us know what Steiner to read, because that wasn't in the.
So I think it's not going to be a Steiner. I think
it's
it's an essay. I think I found a PDF, which is an interesting and maybe provocative essay, called something like on Steiner's Jewish problem. So I thought, but I'll make sure that that's available in the next couple of days.
Just one other really quick thought is that the Google Docs are set up with, I threw in just a selection of additional readings. And if the group has ideas, like we've already gone there with the Ezra Klein interview, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and so on. And I'll talk to Itamar and see if there's a way to just have people add what they feel is interesting. I don't know what you think about that.
That sounds good. All right, I'm gonna read off a couple of lines from Steiner, from a piece called "Our Homeland." The text. I cannot shake off the conviction that the torment and the mystery of resilience in Judaism exemplify, enact an arduous truth that human beings must learn to be each other's guests on this small planet, even as they must learn to be guests of being itself and of the natural world.
Yeah.
This is a truth humbly immediate to our breath, to our skin, to the passing shadow we cast on a ground inconceivably more ancient than our visit, and it is also a terrible, abstract, morally and psychologically exigent truth. Man will have to learn it, or he will be made extinct in suicidal waste and violence. I found that stimulating, and I think so. I'll make sure to send around an essay that riffs on that, and to also figure out which excerpts from Arendt and Amari. And this was a great conversation. Thanks, everyone.
I just want to point out that this I don't know if there ever was a conversation that was more Sukkot than this conversation. We're in the midst of it, and here I'll give you a peek at what's left of our little sukkah here, and so we can all feel like we're in a little sukkah. There we go. Yeah. So
all homes are provisional. Sukkot is the holiday of provisional home.
That's it. Yeah. We celebrate homelessness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Homelessness.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sameach.
Nice to
everyone.
see you all.
Thanks, everyone.